It's a little early, but
well,
got a lot to do today.
It's 9:40 for me back home, so
I guess that's true.
I haven't adjusted the time yet.
Yeah, you guys were probably tired last night.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Holy crap.
Yeah.
Well, I think I told Jace would not go to bed.
Oh, really?
No, he was like the movie Big Daddy, where remember Adam Sandler had that little kid?
Yeah.
And he's like rolling around in the newspapers. He's like, will you just go to bed? Yeah. And I'm doing that, just like blankets flying everywhere. There's pillows coming off the bed. I'm like, dude, go to bed. And he's like, I can't sleep. It's 2 a.m. We're getting up at 4 for our flight. And I'm like, I've got 2 hours. So
yeah.
We got here yesterday.
Was he just excited to?
He was excited. I mean, they've been doing countdown for a month.
That's
right?
cool.
Since we told them that we were coming. They've been counting down every day. They wake up and they're like, oh, only 35 more days till Montana.
That's awesome.
Right.
That's awesome.
They love it. So,
well, hopefully they'll have a good time out here. Today's going to be a little rainy. It's going to be
it's a good change for us.
Avoid the weather.
Good change for us. We had a lot of rain beginning of the summer.
And you guys had piles of rain.
It was horrible. Flooding. It's like one day between noon and 3, we had like 4.5 inches of rain.
That's crazy.
It is crazy for Pennsylvania, especially central PA.
I mean, it's honestly, I guess it's good just to get, speaking from out here, which we've been in, it feels like a multi-year drought. We could use a summer like that.
Oh, that, yeah.
This weather today is actually going to be, in the last couple of weeks, we've had some pretty nice thunderstorms come through and, but honestly, an all day just cool soaker would be really good for the forest fire situation out here, which we don't have a bunch of big fires, but this will pretty much put an end to fire season as far as anything concerning, because obviously fall's right around the corner.
Yeah. That's it. Jace asked me on the plane on the way out, he said, hey, how much snow does Josh and Jess get? And I'm like, I really don't know, buddy. I know it gets cold.
You guys
in their area, I don't know how much snow.
Yeah. That was actually the flagpole guys asked me that yesterday. And I'm like, 10 years ago, I'd have answered it different than today. Like today, now I'm like, I don't even know because we always had a lot of snow growing up,
right?
And of course up in Lincoln, we got more, but there was always a foot or two of snow around, it felt like in the winter,
right?
Like kind of on the level, always had snow on the ground. And then we could get some pretty good sized storms and definitely cold. But man, in the year my house burned down, I think was 2011 or 12, maybe 12, 13, something I can't remember, 13. That's the last year I remember us having like a lot of snow. Okay. When that happened, there was like 2 feet of snow in my yard.
Really?
And there was a couple days where I drove a little like commuter car to work when I was a lineman at that point, and I got like stuck on a road and had to walk in, and plow.
Yeah.
Like, that kind of snow.
Okay.
We haven't had that outside of 1 or 2 little storms here or there in 10 years. It's been like this last winter, we had 0 snow at Christmas, just brown.
Really?
Yeah. And then, decent kind of snow a little bit in January, February. But now we'll get some cold here and there. We'll be 30, 40 below 0.
Yeah.
But you guys in general, and this has always been the case, you guys seem to get those
nor'easters.
Yeah, man.
And it's like early March.
Yeah.
Get these storms up the East Coast.
Just monster storms.
Yeah.
We never really get that. Like if we get a foot of snow, 18 inches of snow in a storm, like that's a big storm. And it's usually, if we get those, it's dry, fluffy.
Okay.
But you guys, upstate New York and all that lake effect stuff and those nor'easters, because you guys are so much closer to the water and those things spin off the coast and or off the Great Lakes.
Yeah, I did med school in Erie, and it was like there was always snow. The streets, roads are never clear.
Yeah,
and they can't use salt there, so it's only they only do sand because as they're clearing streets, they're dumping it in the lake.
Oh,
so they can't do salt, ice melt, or else they're disturbing the environment of the lake. So.
Yeah,
but for us, like central, like we're about as dead center in Pennsylvania as you can get.
Yeah,
and we still get some of that lake effect. It's just nuisance snow, right?
Yeah.
Like. You've been to our house, waking up and it's like you have 1.5 inches, 2 inches. It's something that I still have to get off the driveway because our driveway's straight up and down.
Yeah, you're on a ski slope.
It's like nuisance. Every day you'll get those little, these little clippers that'll come through the valley and just dump 1.5 inches, 2 inches. But we haven't had a major nor'easter for quite a while. Like when I was in high school, schools were closed for like 2.5 weeks. I mean, everything was closed.
Really?
They issued state of emergency because we got close to 3 feet in one day.
Damn.
Right?
Yeah, that's a lot of stuff.
And in PA, that's a lot. Right?
See, we don't get those storms. Yeah. We don't get stuff like that.
See, we used to, and we haven't had a, knock on wood because I don't want them, but so I want to say like 95, I think, was a real big one that closed everything down for 2 weeks. And then around 2000, maybe 99, 2000, we had another one like that closed everything down.
Yeah.
So we get more, in the spring with the melt and it starts raining a lot. So depending on temperature in Pennsylvania, we'll see a lot of the flooding.
Okay.
Right. So I remember when I first came out of residency, had my first, real job, big boy job, we had flooding so bad that to get doctors in and out of the hospital, we're using our life flight. Because for one hospital, right? Because the hospital was situated between, multiple rivers and big creeks and stuff like that, that it was shut off. I mean, the town was shut off to everything.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So it was, shuttling people back and forth because like, okay, how long, you're an emergency department that's available to that community, but where it's kind of flooded, it's like you still have people coming in for emergencies. And when they're without power and they're without, then it's like everything's an emergency.
Right.
So you're seeing more people. And then the aftermath of that, now the whole town's flooded. Yeah. And we had a big outbreak of Giardia. So like we have people coming in with fever left and right.
Contaminated water.
Yep, exactly. And people are going, cleaning their homes and, you know. So
I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, flooding in the spring is a real issue, for us at times. So
it'll be interesting to see because you guys seem like this year you're in like this wet pattern. Well, it'll be interesting to see if that continues into the winter because you could have a big winter out of it.
Dude, I hope not. You've seen my driveway. It's like, I hope not. Where am I going to put it all?
Yeah. Do you have tire chains for your tractor? Like for plowing?
I have chains. Yeah.
Yeah. Because those rubber tire machines on ice are worthless.
Oh, they're horrible.
Yeah. I mean, you would be a tractor toboggan.
Well, so, you've met my older brother.
Yeah.
Yeah. John. Yeah. So he took his skid steer, his track skid steer, and he put freaking screws in it, right? In the track to get traction on ice.
Redneck studs.
Well, yeah. And then you're just catching those things in your tires.
I was going to say, that's what I was going to say. Like, I'm not sure that's the best.
My brother's a smart dude. Like he figures things out, right? Owns a roofing business. He knows how to, he sees a problem. He's going to figure it out in the moment. Right.
Just got to run a magnet down your driveway in the spring.
Right. So, every now and then, I come out in the morning and I've got a flat tire and, there's roofing freaking nails in my tires and stuff because he just throws everything in the bed and go in the bed of his pickup and goes. But
go to the tire shop and say, put this on John's account.
No, he claims it's not him at all. I'm like, who else has freaking big roofing nails coming up and down my driveway? But
that's funny.
And it's
the flooding thing that it's like seeing what happened in Texas. And I was actually thinking about you during that time, like the emergency room people, with you being, for people that don't know, you're an emergency doc.
Yep.
That had to have been just horrific for those emergency room people during that time period.
Yeah, I mean, for the whole spectrum of first responders, right? Which, it's your fire, your police, EMS, emergency medicine, what physician, PA, nurses, everything. When you have those types of events, it's, it's stressful.
Yeah.
We're the safety net for the community, and the way it's structured through legislation, we have to be open.
Yeah.
We have to stay open, and we can't deny anybody care. You know, so we can't investigate you when you come in based on insurance, ethnicity, religious beliefs, or anything like that. Like, you come through our door, we have to care for you. And in situations like that, you have a major flood. You're not just going to be dealing with the major things,
the victims,
right? The victims, but you're going to be dealing with a lot of kind of psychosocial issues too.
Okay.
Right. So you're going to have people with severe anxiety that thinks there's something, so it ramps things up significantly. And you not only have the emergency department to worry about, but you also have the scenes to worry about too.
Right.
So, emergency medicine is a very tight knit community. So when something like that happens, you see this response from around the country. So people will, they will get there, to help out.
Well, we've talked about preparedness, and you've got your business that you're kind of starting with the
PrepEm Wild. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's like, how do you be prepared for flash floods? I mean, most people don't ever think that's going to happen. Now, I do know that is an area that's had it before, but it might have been an entire generation ago. There's a lot of 25-year-old kids that weren't even alive the last time they had major flooding.
Right.
Because they've had it in that area, but I think it was in like the 70s or something, like the last like really horrific one.
Yeah, I mean, that was catastrophic, that area. I mean, you look at it and the devastation was just...
But how you prepare for that?
Well, I mean, I think the essential things that you look at, in preparedness for, natural disaster type situations, it's like food and water is essential. Food, water, shelter, right? So we break it down in the rules of 3 for preparedness, right? It's, oxygen, food, water, shelter, that type of thing. And we call it the rules of 3 because it's, with oxygen, like you can go no more than, 3 minutes, and with water, no more than three days, and food, no more than, 3 weeks. So, having, that food supply, and I'm not not natural produce, stuff like that, but really, dried goods.
The rice and beans too.
Yeah, because when something like that happens, it's the whole infrastructure that you depend on is gone, right? Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing that's going to happen is people panic, and then they're going in and potentially looting stores and taking everything off the shelves. And you don't want to get yourself into that situation, because then that becomes a whole new preparedness, scenario. You end up stabbed, you end up shot in an overwhelmed, emergency system that you now have to seek medical care. So aside from, food, water, and maintaining that, then we get into kind of the medicine side of it, and what are the essential, what's the essential equipment that you need, right? And I think people look at preparedness for medicine, and the vast majority don't, they don't have a good understanding, right? You can't take my 20 years of experience and, I can't like hand that over to you. I can do the best at educating and preparing people. And that's the whole premise of PrepEm Wild, right?
Yeah.
So recognizing, after 20 years of doing this and being on the receiving end of people that, have emergencies, and really having front row seat to, the lack of preparedness or the lack of response. And, we deal with that in the situation, right? In the moment, how do we better prepare people? And I'm just, I'm an outdoorsman. I love hunting. I love fishing. And so I'm very, I'm connected into that community. So, a lot of people have my cell phone number, and I get a lot of phone calls, a lot of text messages. Hey man, like this. So I saw it as an opportunity, and within our community, and we put ourselves in situations where we have to do better as a community, right? And it's not just for yourself, but it's for the group that you're with, right? So if you go out in a party of 4, be that asset, within the group. Don't be that liability and kind of standing there, with your hands in your pocket, watching somebody bleed out, or watching somebody, something as simple as a sprained ankle that you're, miles back in, and not know how to manage it. So that's kind of why we started, PrepEm Wild, and just kind of raise the bar in preparedness.
And that preparedness extends not just for people in their hunting packs, but
home, also
in your car and at home
community.
And it's similar, at least from a bare necessity standpoint. It's the similar necessities, whether you're in your car, home, or out in the field. Right.
So, kind of the bare necessities that we look at, you're always going to need those gauzes, right? And gauze, and whether you're looking at a 2x2 or a 4x4 gauze, and and that's just measurements of the gauze itself.
What would you use gauze for?
Gauze we can use for a lot of things. I mean, gauze is useful, across the spectrum. So, you carry a pack of 4x4 gauze. I mean, you can use that to pack wounds. You can use that to protect wounds. You can use that to stabilize foreign bodies. So, you catch a stick in the eye, the last thing you want to do is rip that stick out, right? So you just want to more or less stabilize it. You can put gauze around that to act kind of as a splint for that foreign body in your eye.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
See, it's something I didn't know. And that's so easy to do. I mean,
yeah.
Where were we? We were hiking through the woods. Man, I think maybe we were in North Carolina. I can't remember. It was just recently, but going through the woods, and I about caught, I was looking at my feet.
Yeah.
And looked up and just about got a stick right to the face. And so I reach up and break off that stick because I had 4 or 5 people coming behind me. Yeah. But I mean, that's an example. I mean, if you're walking with your headlamp.
Oh yeah.
And you're so focused on just your little spotlight and you catch a stick coming out of the corner right in the eye. So, I mean.
And it's shocking to me. And it's more or less reflex. Somebody catches a stick in the eye and they impale their eye with it. And it kind of reflex. They want to pull that thing out.
Oh, I would.
Right.
1,000%.
Worst thing you can do. Right.
Really?
You don't want to go ripping that stick out because what you're going to cause, more significant damage to your eye, potentially lose your eye too.
Okay.
So that's something that, we just want to, kind of stabilize in place. Right. So, using
so that gauze could. Now, is that gauze untreated or is that like blood clotting gauze?
No, it's not blood clotting gauze.
So this is just.
Yeah. This is essential, just basic gauze.
Okay.
And it's not a non-adherent gauze. So when we look at gauzes and bandages, we'll have gauzes and bandages that can adhere to wounds, which we don't want to use, say, on, bad scrapes, burns, lacerations. Okay. So we want to use non-adherent gauzes on that. And the reason being is, the non-adherent, you can change your dressing off and you're not opening that wound over and over and over.
Okay.
Right. So
ripping that. Yeah, that scab or blood clot and stuff out of there.
Right. So, clotting in wounds is good. That's our body kind of getting those cells there to start remodeling and forming new cells to heal up. Right. Mm-hmm. And that brings me to, the point of, basic wound care too. So a lot of people carry alcohol or hydrogen peroxide, things like that to manage their wounds. And you don't ever want to put alcohol or hydrogen peroxide in a wound.
Okay.
And a lot in
why?
Over 20 years, I've seen that over and over and over again.
Oh, as kids, that was like the
you just watch it bubble. It's really cool. I remember as a kid, my mom would dump, gallons of peroxide on wounds.
Fizzes all up.
Fizzes up, and this is going to sting.
Like a little volcano.
Yeah, the why is, so, that hydrogen peroxide, that fizzing and bubbling, what it's doing is it's killing those cells that's trying to remodel the wound. Right. Okay. So you're essentially just delaying the wound healing. Right. So if you're in a situation where you're on a hunt for a week, 10 days, and you're putting peroxide on it, you increase the potential for infection by keeping that wound open longer.
Wow.
Right. And that's the whole, suturing wounds, when we have a bad laceration and they're like, oh yeah, I needed stitches, I needed sutures, theoretically, it's like, you don't have to really stitch much, you have to stitch something that continues to bleed, right, to close that off and what we call tamponade the wound so you don't keep bleeding. And sometimes you have to, throw a suture across a vessel to make it stop bleeding, ligate, we'll say ligate that vessel.
Okay.
So you tie that vessel off so you're not bleeding out. But that boosts basic wound care and, the need for suturing. I mean, there's significant surgeries that are done where somebody's abdomen's just left wide open to heal by secondary intent.
Yeah.
A lot of times we'll suture looking at a wound and kind of looking at, decreasing the risk of, infection potential. So the sooner we close that, the better, because now it's not, wide open exposed and letting bacteria exposed. Right. So, I've seen some people carrying, suture material and needle drivers and forceps and all these things, in a kit, and then they've never really sutured a wound anyway. So you see these things come in and it's just mangled, right? Yeah. And they've done their best, but then on the receiving end of that, it's, you look at that and say, okay, opening this thing back up, and when you start opening wounds back up that have been closed, and it may look bad and it's going to leave a horrible scar. You don't want to really go opening wounds back up because we get right back into that cycle of, bacteria exposure and potential, for infection. So, but
if they've closed it up in the field, they've likely also closed it up with foreign subjects, bodies in it, basically dirt.
Yeah, dirt. Whatever.
So you've cut yourself. So what is that wound care process? Like, what do you carry in your pack to put in that wound?
Right. So in the wound, we really don't want to put anything in it.
Like Neosporin? Is Neosporin bad?
I wouldn't put it in the wound particularly, right? So the best thing you can do is flush it out. And when I say flush, it's not just doing like a little wipe of the thing. It is like taking bottles of water. Now, you don't want to just go grabbing a bottle from the stream and, dumping it in there, right? Because there's bacteria.
Filter it.
Yeah, you want to filter the water. If you need to, and you're in a position that you need to boil water to irrigate a wound, you have to take that step. Obviously, you don't want to take boiled water and dump that right into the wound, or else you're dealing with a burn. But
obviously,
well, I'll say these things because 20 years I've seen this. Yeah, you kind of see it all. But irrigating the wound is essential. Mm-hmm. If you don't irrigate the wound and you go putting a bandage over it and you're changing that every 2-3 days, you're just keeping bacteria in the wound and you're going to end up with a nasty infection. So irrigation is step 1 and 2, right? Mm-hmm. So first step is control bleeding, right? You need to get pressure on that wound. So if it's a significant wound and you're really bleeding, it's like get pressure on that. And when I say pressure, it's not, hold it for 30 seconds to a minute and keep looking and keep looking, because it's not going to stop. Like you need to put pressure on that 15, 20 minutes, kind of set a timer, try to forget it, walk away from that and not keep, reassessing over and over and over again. That's a mistake that a lot of people make. They'll come into the ER and say, I can't get this to stop bleeding, but they're just checking every minute if it's bleeding. They don't give it a chance to stop bleeding. So, controlling of hemorrhage, irrigation, and then wound care is super basic. And I think a lot of people overcomplicate it, thinking that they need, like you said, hydrogen peroxide or alcohol, Neosporin, stuff like that. Lacerations and burns, right? Burn care is very basic. You're again, control hemorrhage. You want to irrigate that burn. And then it's basic, just a basic Vaseline over it and a non-adherent dressing, right? So when we talk about essentials within a kit, you're going to have that dressing that can be adherent that we can use for many different things, but a non-adherent dressing is essential too. So when you're dealing with a laceration or a burn itself, as you're changing that, you're not ripping that, especially with a burn, you're not ripping that skin off, and making the burn worse.
Right.
So, Neosporin, bacitracin, things like that, certainly carry within the kit. That is the only thing that we recommend to put over a burn or a wound, right? Like and then the dressing. Yeah. I mean, you use basic Vaseline.
Okay.
Yeah. And using, you don't put gobs of it.
And say just a cut.
Yeah.
In a standard cut, from a knife or whatever, a fall, split your, arm or elbow or whatever open. Do you also put Vaseline over or in that before you put that?
So I would put over it, right? So, and it's a thin.
But don't like dig it in there.
No, don't pack it in.
Yeah.
Right.
Because, just over that surface.
Right. So, when you think about it, if you go putting gobs of even Neosporin on there, you can be trapping foreign material in that, thick layer of Neosporin or Vaseline, right? So it's like very thin layer over it. And that helps with adherence of the bandage, helps with keeping it moist to start with. So you're not getting a dried out wound.
Not adhering.
Correct. Not adhering. Right. So,
which is what you want.
So if you're left with nothing but, an adherent bandage, like a basic 4x4 or 2x2 gauze, really putting a layer of that stuff on the inside of that gauze that you're going to put against your skin can help with that adherence too. Obviously the gauze
is the blood clotting gauze, does it adhere? Does it tend to bind in with that blood and adhere? Yeah,
it can. Yeah, that stuff can adhere.
So you really don't need the blood clotting gauze unless you have a serious bleeding wound.
Yeah. Again, so going back to, that 15, 20 minutes of pressure, legitimately, before I'm going to jump to doing a combat type gauze, and that clotting gauze, I want to make sure that, I've looked at this for 15 to 20 minutes and it's not bleeding anymore. Now in my position, being in the emergency department, there's some wounds that come in that you're just like, this is not going to stop. Right.
Yeah. We're immediately packing that thing.
You're immediately packing it. Right. And, you can use combat gauze. There's also powders that, you can dump in there to help control that too. Now in our situation, in our environment, it's like we have access to a lot more tools and stuff that you get that under control. So if I see a major, vessel bleeding, bad scalp wound, I mean, scalps bleed horribly. They look horrible. They present, people, have lost a lot of blood from them where you just throw a suture around that vessel, but if you're in the field, using a gauze, combat type gauze to put in that wound to help control the bleeding and putting pressure, over top of that, right? Mm-hmm. So whether that's, a non-adherent or a basic 4x4, and then using kind of your ACE wrap or your elastic type bandage to put pressure around that too, or an Israeli bandage, right? Israeli bandages are really nice.
Yep.
These are things that were, developed, back during, the Bosnian conflicts, and then, further developed during the early, Iraqi, wars theater over there.
So that's basically that big pad in the middle with like elastic bands that come off of it with maybe some plastic clips or something.
So the plastic clip, right? So everybody thinks that that's a clip to keep that thing attached, right?
Yeah, I know it's not that.
Yeah. You already knew, right?
Yeah, of course.
No. So, so an Israeli bandage, in terms of wound care, essential. It's something that if you have extra room, I would certainly carry. Okay. So it's an elastic bandage with, it's an elastic band with a bandage that's sewn into it.
Yep.
Right. So, and you'll see a little tag on that thing, and that's where you're putting it over the wound. Right. Because there's that kind of C clip on there.
Yep.
Right. Where you feed the elastic bandage through it. Mm-hmm. And what that's doing is, and you fold it back over that. And what that does is that plastic C-clamp is putting the pressure on the wound then.
Oh, okay.
So it kind of tightens that down.
Ah.
So a lot of people will just run that through that kind of I'll just call it a C-clip, but kind of like through that C-clip, thinking that it's just keeping the bandage kind of, together. But it serves a purpose, and it was designed that way. And then on the very end, you have two clips that actually attach it back to itself, right?
Which I'm guilty of this, obviously. I mean, I didn't know that. It's funny. We buy this gear like for hunting and whatnot, and we'll watch YouTube videos about how to use it all and blah, 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 blah. But then we buy all this medical stuff, but then we don't go watch any videos. We just kind of assume so it does. I mean, it's like with the Israeli one, even if people can't picture what you were just describing, like they should go watch a YouTube video on the proper use of that.
Yeah. And that's, that's kind of the void.
That's the point of PrepEm Wild.
That's the point of PrepEm Wild.
Yeah.
Right.
You're providing on your Instagram page, some of this how-to information. Yeah. I've seen you do burn stuff, even just sunburns.
Yeah.
I've seen you cover that on your page.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because honestly, a lot of times hunters, skiers, hikers, they actually get horribly sunburned. You get up at elevation. I think a lot of people think, well, it's not real hot up here. It's 70 degrees. It's not 100.
Yeah. You're gonna get fried.
You're just cooked.
Yeah. You get fried.
Absolutely cooked.
I mean, and you end up with a 2nd degree burn, extensively. If you're out there with just a t-shirt on, mm-hmm. and you have a extensive 2nd degree burn, that can turn life-threatening. Mm-hmm. It's if that's not being managed appropriately, you can put yourself in a really bad situation, right?
Yeah.
So in terms of, rehydration and management of that, that burn, it can turn ugly quick.
So with your PrepEm, mm-hmm. and you guys have some kits coming shortly. Right. When this podcast, honestly, I think it's going to be a few weeks before this drops. So you may even have these by the time this drops. Yep. I encourage people. What's the website?
PrepEmWild.com.
Okay. So
under construction right now. So by the time, by the time this drops, it's like that'll all be tied up. But and it's really just looking at it an essentials kit. Like what we think, everyone should carry, not just on a hunting trip, but, if you're out bicycling, you're out hiking, in your vehicle, really just having those essential things, Well,
I think most guys that do carry medical supplies, I know I've been guilty of this. Most people are probably carrying, there's two different types of guys. The guy that carries nothing.
Right. Which is the worst.
Nothing.
Which is the worst.
And then there's the guy that carries, well-intentioned, a bunch of stuff that, to be honest, probably could carry half of the amount, but as far as like bulk is considered.
No, exactly.
But of the proper things that you actually need, you could probably cut down on some of these guys' medical kits, provide them more room in their bag.
Oh my God, yeah.
But actually supply them with more useful, life-saving.
Right.
Because let's face it, most guys that are hunting hard, I mean, especially if you're camping overnight or multiple nights, you're short on space. You're up there on weight. And you don't necessarily need a lot of stuff to provide you superficial, comfort.
Right.
But you absolutely need the most life-threatening items in your pack, and also enough stuff to keep you on the mountain. So like I'm going on a goat hunt here in a week. I'm leaving. By the time this podcast drops, I may even be back or on that hunt. But you do want to carry enough stuff to keep you up there. Like if I cut myself on day 2 and I've waited 2 years, 3 years to go on this hunt, and I cut myself, one, I need the knowledge to know, because you don't assume that the guides actually know. I've actually been appalled with the guides I've been like, what do you carry in your pack? Because we used to put together a medical kit and sell it. And we just found like, we're better off letting professionals like you do that. One, sourcing the stuff's hard. Two, I'm not the expert in all the things. We did seek expert advice and help with putting those together. And, and there's opinions even from the experts that vary on some certain things. But the point is, I was carrying my medical kit, and then you ask the guide who's literally in charge of a bunch of dummies that come up there that know nothing about hunting in Canada or Alaska or Montana. You ask them like, what do you have in your kit? You're supposed to keep me safe. I'm the client, right? And they have nothing.
Nothing.
It's bonkers to me. And I'm like, I'm the guy that's prepared, and I'm the freaking client.
Right. So no, you bring up you bring up a major issue here, right?
Yeah.
So, we're booking these hunts through outfitters, in the sense like they're there to, keep you safe on multiple levels.
And frankly, most of these people that are booking these hunts, and not that I don't want to put myself out there like I'm the most experienced guy, but I'm pretty experienced, like yourself, pretty experienced. So if we book a hunt, it's more about access or, like I have to have a guide for this goat hunt. Right. And I don't know Alaska, so like it makes sense.
Yeah.
But a lot of these people that book these hunts have maybe even never been on a hunt ever. They know nothing.
Right. Oh, I've been in camps, man, where, and again, it's, it's not criticism of the people that are coming into camp, because, hey, they've been busting their butt their whole life, working a job and saving up money, and it's been a dream of theirs to get there. Right. But, I go to, you have to have a guide in Canada, where I go moose hunting, caribou hunting. It's like, you have to have a guide with you. Right. Do I need a guide? Not necessarily. Right. Know the territory now, been doing it for, over a decade. You have to, but you watch some of these guys come in the camp, and number one, when you look at a lot of these hunts, some of them are kind of an older guys, thing, right? Yeah. The demographic are these older guys.
Well, they generally have the money.
They have the money.
Afford it.
They have the money and time. Yeah. Right. When we're young, when we're in our 20s and stuff, it's like, you're just trying to grind, pay off debt, get a home, all that stuff. And, you don't have the money, and then you're grinding and working, and you don't have the time. Right. Most people, it's like you have to save up, PTO or vacation time to go away.
Yeah. Live that life.
So it's an older guy's game, really.
Yeah.
And, it's like rolling these camps, and some of them I'm just like, just nightmare waiting to happen.
But you're counting on the outfitter and the guide to.
We should be, right?
Right.
We should be. And that's the major issue, that you bring up. So if you're running a legitimate outfitting business and you have guides out there that are not prepared, to respond in that moment, all of your clients, your customers, are at risk, because I think in a sense, people show up just kind of expecting that they're going to be taken care of. And these people are well-trained, and they're stocked up, and they have everything that's essential to keep you safe.
Well, I would even argue hunters that are somewhat prepared a lot of times leave things behind because they just assume, well, I don't need to pack that. The guide's going to have that.
Right.
And so they leave their med kit behind.
Yeah.
And then they come to find out they have a cut and they're miles from anywhere.
Yeah.
And they ask their guide like, hey, take care of this. And it's like, well, I don't have anything.
Like, I don't.
And you do tend to wonder, like, as far as a guide or an outfitter, in a really bad situation, are you actually hanging out there liability wise? Like the client signed up to come out there with you. I mean, people have sued for less. And so if I'm a guide or an outfitter, having at least the basics, you could stand there and say, hey, I brought life-saving stuff here.
Right.
you know, and if you don't have that and somebody does tragically lose their life, like you do open
you're out there. You're out there.
Yeah, it's
and in the same sense. Okay, you can go and equip all of your guides with what you feel is essential, you know, first aid, you know, type stuff. You go to Walmart and, you know, buy the little lunchbox first aid kit and hand it out and put it in all the guides' vehicles. You know, you're really out there if you equip your guides, but you don't have any training in place for them.
Right.
So if they have the equipment, but they lack the training to respond, you know, I see that. I see that.
You have a bad cut and you throw a tourniquet on a guy, and 3 days later he's lost his arm, and he never even needed the tourniquet in the beginning.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And you know, that's the other, you know, kind of the other side of PrepEm is the education piece too.
Yeah.
You know, and I've been, you know, with groups, and I work with local high schools back home, you know, starting these, you know, our local high schools have an outdoors club, which I think is fantastic. It's getting these kids engaged, involved in the outdoors, and, you know, they do, you know, hiking trails and maintaining streams and all this stuff. And, you know, the school liability is they recognize, like, we're liable for these students. If we take them out on a trail and kid slips and impales himself with a stick, you know, we're liable for that.
Yeah.
So they take the steps to make sure that the teachers and, you know, the volunteers that are along are prepared. You know, so I work with some of those schools to, you know, better prepare them for the response too.
Yeah.
You know, and the same thing for an outfitter. It's, you know, that's the other side of what we're doing is, you know, that education.
Yeah.
You know, I love small group or even large group, you know, education, you know, kind of venues, right?
Yeah.
Where, you know, you can go in and, you know, really answer a lot of questions and kind of train people. And it's not complicated. I think a lot of people are intimidated to be part of that too.
Yeah.
Right. So they think of, you know, an ER doc coming in and, you know, there's, you know, that degree of, you know, they don't know what they don't know. You know, so, you know, there may be a degree of intimidation there of like, they don't want to ask questions, or they don't want to get involved because they don't want to look like a dumbass.
Right.
Right. And in our world, you know, I say this all the time to, you know, my docs, it's like, there's no such thing as pride.
Right.
Pride kills. You know, if you have so much pride that you can't ask questions, if you have so much pride that you can't ask for help, your patient dies.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and think about this from a proud, you know, maybe somewhat arrogant 35-year-old guy. You know, you might feel that about yourself and, you know, oh, I'll be fine. But like, ask yourself, well, are you prepared to take care of your child in the field?
Oh, yeah.
And that's where a lot of the pride goes away. It's like, well, here, I'm going to ask the dumb question. Because if just imagine it's your kid laying there bleeding.
Right.
And you don't know what to do because you were at this thing and you didn't
ask questions.
You didn't ask questions.
Just because you didn't want to look like a dumbass.
Right. So now who's the dumbass? You're laying there with your kid bleeding on the mountain and you don't know what to do.
I mean, that's men. That's men in general too.
And I
want to ask a question. We don't want to be the dummy.
I cut the shit out of Hank. Hank will have a scar for the rest of his life. He has a big ass scar across the top of his hand. Like, I've been there, no cell phone service, 30 miles from Jordan, Montana, right at dark, you know, deer, you know, had half loaded in the truck, and my kid freaking bleeding like crazy.
Right.
You know, it's like,
it's frightening.
Yeah. And honestly, I was pretty sure I'd gotten into tendons, you know, which as it turns out, you could see the tendons in the wound when they started irrigating that at the hospital. And they actually did some tests on his fingers to make sure
they're intact.
Yeah. Because it was like, you know, do we need to send you off to a hand surgeon or not?
Yeah.
Luckily we didn't. He just needed stitches. But, you know, and I'm actually really looking forward to having our new building and facility done. You know, when I gave you guys a tour and whatnot, I talked a lot about like events, right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, events there aren't necessarily just like parties. I'm talking about educational events. So like, I can't wait to bring you in and open it up, have a bunch of people from the public or guides and outfitters like, hey, let's gather here on a Saturday and Mike's going to train you guys all day.
Yeah.
He's going to bring stuff and we're going to show you how to apply tourniquets and, you know, there's going to be maybe some photos of some bad wounds. And it's like, well, what do we do in this case? What do we do in that case? And have you come out and teach some classes.
I would love that.
And then have people be able to buy some, again, this isn't from a money-making standpoint. It's like, you're an ER doc.
Right.
You make a good salary.
Yeah.
This isn't, some giant, money grab play or whatever, but you've been around now the last few years in our community, and then the last 25 years of your career, you've seen ill-prepared people walk into your hospitals by the thousands. And so, I think it's going to be really cool experience to watch you teach these guys, and then watch guys leave there prepared with basic life-saving tools to put in their kits, and then maybe go off and train their guides that work for them if they're outfitters, or their hunting buddy. To be honest, bringing your hunting buddy to something like that and training him, and even buying him a kit.
Oh yeah,
it's not for him.
You're caring for yourself. You're caring for yourself.
Like you're probably not necessarily applying all this stuff to yourself unless you're hunting solo, but most guys are hunting with a buddy.
Yeah.
And so it's probably your buddy taking care of you, unless he's passed out. Yeah. Then maybe
I have a buddy like that. He sees blood. It's like, boop, out he goes. So you're on your own, man. Like you are on your own.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, that brings up another great point of like, we can go out and buy all the equipment we think we need. And if you're not being trained on, if you're not educated on it, it's worthless.
Right.
It's like, when we go hunting, we don't go out and buy a new rifle and then not even fire it.
Right.
And not spend time on the range. Right. Zeroing it in to make sure that we can be successful. And it's the same thing in medicine too.
Well, and this isn't just hunting. Equipment. A lot of people that listen to this or follow us maybe even aren't necessarily hunters. My own daughter had an experience this summer, years ago, as my kids started getting driver's licenses. And that was around the same time that I had taken where my eyes opened up to this was the first time I saw Tier teach at Winter Strong.
Yep.
And he did the whole tourniquet thing. And what struck me is I was a guy with kids that were starting to hunt, starting to drive. And he said, this tourniquet's $30 or whatever. And he's like, how would you feel if you're in a, not even maybe that bad of a car accident, but your kid's laying next to you bleeding out.
Right.
And you chose not to buy a $30 tourniquet to save their life. And they bleed out right next to you unnecessarily, 5-10 miles from a hospital. And he's like, it's $30. Have tourniquets in your car. If you have nothing else, have some tourniquets around.
Exactly.
And I was like, that struck me, because knowing that if I was ever in that situation and knew I'd been told that, I wouldn't be able to live with myself. And so put together med kits and put them in all of my kids' cars, and also told them these have to be in your car where you can reach them if you're pinned in your own seat.
That's right.
If you want to apply your own self tourniquet. They've never been used. Probably my kids were probably just like, Dad, geez, being a helicopter parent.
Psycho, you're crazy. This is nuts.
Well, my daughter drives up first on the scene, sees a guy get hit by a semi on a freaking motorcycle just 2 months ago.
Yeah.
And I know you had some discussions with her, but, definitely mentally affected her pretty hard. But she grabbed her med kit and, was packing gauze into his wounds. And, the other guy that showed up was dragging the motorcycle off. And at the end of it, paramedics show up. Demi's covered in blood, and paramedics do their thing, and they drive off, and she's sitting there just shook by the situation. Yeah. But I know she was very proud and happy of the fact that she had that med kit. And she told me, she's like, Dad, I need a new med kit. I mean, my shit's, all strung out and been used. But that's the other piece for people that, they hear PrepEm wild. Well, they hear us talking a lot in a hunting situation, but this stuff applies to your vehicle.
To life, to everything.
To
life. Yeah. Now, and I did connect with her because I certainly with my experience can relate to the mental effect of that. It does shake you. And, for people that aren't involved in our business, I think, that's a significant, mental issue of being it. Now, she's prepared and she's able to intervene, and, she at least had some good feeling about that she did something positive for the person.
Right.
Now imagine you just being there and not having the ability to intervene in a positive way.
And that affected her, and she didn't even know the guy. Right. Now imagine that's your loved one.
Oh,
that's your wife or your child or
but then imagine you don't have the equipment or you don't have the knowledge to intervene, and you just have to stand there and look. That mental effect you're never going to live with.
That's what I'm saying. Like, that's what I'm trying to get across to people is, this isn't all about the fixing of the wound. It's about the mental aspect of at least being, as they head off to the hospital, being like, well, I did what I could. I was somewhat prepared. Probably never as prepared as you really want to be after that situation. It's probably going to drive you to go get more training.
Right.
But at least some level of training.
Well, and what I find when I talk with people is, the people that have been in those situations are typically the ones that have a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Previously, may not have asked about anything, but they're forced into a situation like that. And now they realize that this is real deal, and it's a possibility when you're out there, right? Whether you're driving to work, whether you're going on a hunt, whether you're biking or hiking, it's like these situations are going to pop up.
Well, I mean, it's like anything else. If you go on your first hunt, when you come home, you're now going to start researching all the things that you realized you didn't know. Yeah. I mean, it's what makes you a better hunter the second and third and fifth time you go.
Yeah.
Is the practical experience. So until you've had that practical knowledge, situation, even myself, I've still never had like a traumatic incident that I've responded to or been at. We had one that we was very, very close last year on our Canadian moose hunt.
Yeah, you told me about that.
And that was a situation that was scary, and honestly could have been absolutely tragic. I mean, that, we had a horse explode in the pack string, and it was the guide, one of the most experienced guides on the freaking planet when it comes to animals. But those horses are big, powerful, and they have their own mind.
That's right.
And he decided to blow up, and the plastic pack box on the side of that pack horse, blasted the guide in the leg and knocked him off of his horse. I mean, it didn't knock him off, it blew him off of his horse. You weren't staying on. It wasn't a cowboy situation.
Right.
And he ends up on his back on a rock field, and immediately is in terrible pain, goes ghost white. And we're sure, he's complaining about his hips, his pelvis, his leg, his knee, low back. And it's like, I don't know what's broke, but it's very likely that something or lots of somethings are messed up here. And, as it turns out, over some time and him getting up and whatnot, because it's one of those deals, the closest lake to land like a float plane is 4 or 5 mile walk or horse ride. Well, he can't get on a horse.
Nightmare.
And at first he can't walk. And so then it's like, but we pause to not, have a life flight just take off like a helicopter.
Right.
But the first thing I did do was get my inReach out and message the outfitter back at base, 70 miles away, to just say, hey, start preparing a pilot and start preparing some people to come in here and get him. But, the first thing I said on my message was non-life threatening, because we were pretty sure at that point.
Yeah.
I didn't want to freak them out so bad that they call it
life flight and extract right then and there.
But also, I think the point is that my first thought is they're going to need time to prepare. And if this turns into a life-threatening thing, they need to be on the path. So that was the first thing I did, was just like, hey, FYI, start getting ready, and they were like, roger that. They got a pilot and they got a plane ready, and they were ready to come with just their float plane. But as it turns out, he was able to finally get up and kind of limp it off, and he ended up pissing blood for 4 or 5 days.
Not good.
He definitely
fractured his kidney.
Damaged some shit.
Yeah, probably fractured his kidney.
Yeah, he was pretty messed up. Yeah. But point is, that could have been horrific.
In that situation, like you said, he's thrown from a horse into a boulder field.
Mm-hmm.
Right. You have no idea. Does he have a pelvic fracture?
No, there wasn't a cut. There wasn't,
and there won't be.
You can't see anything.
No. And that assessment, and if somebody's pelvis and whether a pelvis is stable or unstable can mean the difference between life and death. Right. And there's things that we can do in the field to give them the best chance and stop that bleeding and, tamponade that bleeding in the pelvis. So they're going to.
What is that? Is that like your femoral run through there, or what's
so all your major vessel, you have major vessels that run through your pelvis. So when you fracture your pelvis, fracture ribs, bones, it is like shards of glass in there.
Mm-hmm.
I've already had my fingers in chest cavities where it is like glass. and you cut yourself real easy on people's ribs and stuff.
Well, I mean, I've had that on, like, say, deer. You shoot a deer with a rifle.
Yeah, exactly.
And
it's like glass. It's like glass, man. And so imagine, you have the pelvis where you have these major blood vessels running through, and now you have these shards of glass in there.
Okay.
So the more we move the patient, that just shifting around. Yeah. So the initial assessment of a pelvis injury, is it unstable? And as they're lying on the ground, you just take your hands. You don't want to keep doing this over and over and over again, because then you're shifting that glass in there, right, shredding stuff, but really feeling that pelvis. And if you've got movement there, and you'll feel some crepitus.
Are you kind of slightly pushing down on the pelvis as they're laying flat?
Kind of doing a rock of the pelvis, right?
Okay.
And you'll feel it. You can feel that, right? It's you'll feel those bones kind of crunching and sliding back and forth.
Okay.
And if you feel that, get your sweatshirt off, set of pants, whatever, and you can create a pelvic binder, because I mean that's the one thing, like, we're not going to be carrying pelvic binders around in the woods everywhere or in the console of our vehicle, but you can create a makeshift, because before the pelvic binder really became mainstream and readily stocked in all hospitals, we just use bed sheets. So you'd wrap that behind them, and you would cinch it across their pelvis, tie that in a knot, right?
So you kind of sliding that like underneath their butt, and then tying it up right around their hips,
right across their hip bones. So those iliac crests, when you feel your hips that come up, right? You're going to slide it behind their butt and right across them hip bones that you can feel. And what that's doing is that's just bringing that together and keeping it stable. You're more like, it's like splinting the pelvis.
Right.
Right. So it's not shifting around. Right. And the other thing it does is it closes the pelvis. So when we get bad pelvic fractures, what will happen is you have a ligament right down through the middle of both sides of your pelvis, right? You have your sacrum and your tailbone, and out front you have a pubic symphysis, and there's a ligament there. That ligament can get torn, and the whole pelvis can just spring open. So when that springs open, now there's a larger potential space for bleeding, right? Because that's a cavity. So that means, you can just bleed more into that space and lose enough volume and blood in that space to where you go, you collapse, cardiovascularly, and you can go into cardiac arrest and die there. So,
wow.
And Josh, these are the types of things that, through experience and, 20 years of doing this, that you see on that receiving end of being in an ER, or a helicopter flies in and drops somebody off, that you're just there like, man, this person would have known I wouldn't be pronouncing them dead. Or if this bystanders would have known, I wouldn't do a death pronouncement right now, and we'd be having a much different discussion.
Yeah.
So I don't,
and the pelvis thing's very common with horse related.
You bet. I have taken care of so many of those over the years,
I know a few people that have broken pelvises, and one the guy didn't know, but we got the story. But a horse went over backwards on a guy. They used our knife to cut off. The reason I know about it is he sent the story in, but he used to cut the cinch off because the horse was upside down, kind of in a ravine, thrashing on this guy, trying to get up, and it's smashing him. And they cut the cinch and everything off, and we're able to get the horse off of him. But as it turns out, he's laying there with a broken pelvis.
Yeah. And not every broken pelvis is life-threatening.
Sure.
Right. So,
but you don't know.
You don't know.
Guy standing there.
You don't know. I mean, we only know when we get imaging.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But when you hear pelvic fracture, I don't want everybody think like broken pelvis, or when you hear the term, pelvic fracture, that leads to death.
Right.
Because there's, various fractures that we deal with that are non-life threatening, that are stable fractures within the pelvis too.
It's just like a broken arm. There's a cracked broken arm, and then there's a shattered broken arm.
Yeah. And it's, when you get these what we call an open book pelvic fracture, they're the ones that are scary, and that's where we want to, stabilize that as soon as possible, so they're not bleeding out in their pelvis. But I've taken so many, it's like, I don't want to be on horses, man. There's a lot of things that I won't do in life now because I've had to care for that. Like you're not catching my kids on trampolines. And I know it's like, they may hate me for it. I don't care. They can hate me all they want. Like, I'm their father. I'm not their friend here, but it's
you've almost got the misfortune of seeing too much.
Yeah, and
the rest of us are living a bit of an oblivious.
And because that's what you deal with day in and day out, that becomes your reality in life, and you think that it's super common, but statistically, when you look at it, it's not that common.
Yeah, it's the same as the guy who works for the FBI and researches you know, pedophilia cases.
Right.
He ends
Everyone's
up being
a pedophile.
helicopter parent.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Same thing.
Again, it's experience.
Yeah. Like my kids aren't going to be on trampolines because I've taken care of far too many kids that are on trampolines that end up paralyzed because they have they get thrown on the trampoline by an adult and they come down on their head and they break their neck and they're paralyzed. So it's like, well, that's just a risk we don't need to take.
Yeah.
I've taken care of so many horse accidents. I mean, where I work, it's a mix of urban and rural. So you get 10 minutes outside the city and it's just, rural and, Amish and a lot of farm country and farming accidents and horse accidents. It's a really good blend, mix of diseases and pathology that I've dealt with over the years.
Yeah. So let's talk about your kits for a second. So, I mean, we kind of went over like the non-adherent gauze. We covered a little bit the blood clotting gauze for like the most aggressive, like aggressively bleeding wounds that might need packed up. What other kind of things are going to be in your, so
tourniquet.
We barely covered that, but indirectly, but tourniquet is number one, right?
Tourniquet's essential. I mean, that's, you can carry the gauzes and, all these, all this other stuff in your kit. A tourniquet's truly going to be that life-saving tool that we should be carrying.
What's your, you get this, they say one is none, two is one. Are you a two tourniquet guy?
Yeah. I mean, I could, show you pictures here after this of application of tourniquets where it's like I've had used 5, and you get, had a patient situation where it was, both arms were affected. It had 3 on one side and 2 on the other. So one is not. Now this is a situation where, it was a dog attack and, essentially chewed the lady's arms off, but
damn.
Yeah. So, 2, one is none. Now most kits, and including our kit, will be, equipped with 1 tourniquet, and opportunity
you can buy an
to
extra.
buy multiple.
Yeah.
And I think the main reason people don't want to carry tourniquets is because they're bulky.
Yeah.
They're hard to, you know what I mean? It's like, where do you put
and 99% of us have never used one ever.
They're intimidating.
So, and I'm just saying they've never even been in a situation. It's like, well, I've never needed one my whole life. Why do I need 2?
Right.
But I would say if you and your hunting partner each have one,
you're set.
You're better, or your 3 kids with you.
Right.
If every person in your party has one, then you're probably in a good spot.
And that's kind of the mindset of kit having 1 tourniquet. If you've got multiple people with tourniquets, you guys are set.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like you don't need to apply 2 tourniquets right away on every patient. Majority of the time, you're going to be successful with 1 tourniquet, but there's a particular tourniquet that I carry, and that's just because of, ease and, concealment, and it's not bulky. I mean, I can put it right in my pocket.
Really?
Yeah. I have one in my pocket. I mean, it's like I have it in my pocket right now, and it's like you can, carry that anywhere you go.
What is this tourniquet?
This is if I can get in my pocket, got new shorts, pockets are different.
Yeah.
So this is
that baby is tiny.
Yeah. So this is I love these things, and
It's even got a pocket clip on.
Yep,
it.
It's got a pocket clip. You can put it right on your belt. So this is a snake staff system tourniquet.
Okay. Can I take it out or not?
Yeah, go ahead and you can slide it out. And that's just the sheath holder for it.
Yeah.
That you can clip on your belt.
So I don't know.
It'll just keep it together.
We're not real fancy on our screens setup here. Whatever video deal, but since I'm talking, I think it's showing me on here. But but this thing's actually, it's also narrower than most I'm used to here. But yeah, little.
So that's getting in. So you automatically, your attention's drawn to it's narrower than what I'm used to. Right.
What's this bubble?
It's a chem light for time. Right.
It what?
It's a chem light.
So how
so you can visualize where your windlass is. So if you're working in the dark, and you have to readjust. You know where this thing's located.
Oh,
right.
Interesting.
Yeah. So this is like a cat tourniquet. You've got your windlass, you've got your clamp. And what I like about the clamp really is that you've got this little feature here that'll clip it in. I've seen these things back out. And
so there's
you don't realize it.
There's a bunch of really chintzy tourniquets out there, or some little clasp thing that you put on there. And like you say, let's imagine you're packing your buddy out. And it catches on brush. Maybe you're dragging him out on some kind of a freaking game sled or something,
And that's the one, and that's the one major feature that I love about this one, because I've gotten people in the emergency department where they did the right thing in the field and they've applied the tourniquet and they come in and it's like, oh, but they're still bleeding everywhere. And the first thing I do is check this, and guess what? The windlass has backed out of that clamp.
And so you're going to have these on your PrepEm Wild website.
Yeah, that's
actually nice. Big too. I mean, that thing.
Well, so big, but here's the other great thing, Josh. Tighten that thing all the way down. Look at how far the Velcro goes down. So look at that.
Yeah, so you can put it on a baby, right? Or a small,
exactly.
And I did woman arm,
right? And I did this down at Winter Strong, right? I broke this thing out, and we had all the other tourniquets, super wide, and I took my younger daughter Eiley, and you know how tiny she is,
yeah.
And I stood her next to one of the guys at Winter Strong.
Right.
And I said, now
big old quad on him.
Here's the choice of 2 tourniquets. And we put the traditional cat on the big guy. And I said, now put that on my daughter. And you can't get it tightened down enough.
The one person you really want to save.
So
dang, that's
yeah.
And that snaps in there. So I've tightened this thing down on my arm. Yeah, that's
I love them.
Legit.
I love them. I mean, these guys have done a great job.
That hurts.
It does, and it should hurt. So if you're doing it right, it should hurt. Your hand should start turning pale, dusty.
It is.
And you should not feel a pulse.
Yeah, there's no pulse that I can tell.
Right.
You're good at you're
yeah.
Is there a pulse?
No. So you've effectively applied a tourniquet there, and you're going to stop the bleeding. Now there's argument and debate with it. So the tourniquet industry is very political, right?
Yeah.
And there's always debate and argument about which one's the best and why it's the best. And I think a lot of that stems from, the initial development and research and who was involved in, Department of Defense and government involvement and all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
So there's always this debate. And like you said, the first thing you notice, wow, this is not as wide as the ones I'm used to seeing.
Yep.
So, it's criticized as like, well, that can't be effective then because it's not 3 finger widths wide and it's not going to be effective.
Why do they say that it should?
Well, because what you worry about is you get narrower and narrower tourniquets or material. I'll say materials that you use for tourniquet. So if I'm going out and I'm makeshifting a tourniquet out of paracord, right, which people have done.
Yep.
The likelihood of cutting through the soft tissues as you tighten that thing down goes up. Right. Yeah. So if I'm using paracord, I can create a nightmare scenario where I'm actually just cutting through, the skin and the fat and the muscle.
That's why you've never heard me, we sell paracord knives, obviously. You've never heard me suggest that,
no,
like I've said, bootlaces and tie things on your pack and guy your tent out. I mean, technically in the worst case situation, if you knew you had to stop the bleeding and you had to make up some makeshift tourniquet, you're going to do what you're going to have to do. And if you have paracord, you're going to do it. But I never sell it as like, this is a good idea or that
tourniquet material.
No, I mean, don't. It's just not.
Well, and when you have equipment like this, that's available, like why are you using paracord to begin with?
Exactly.
And that's you shouldn't be in a position where you have to.
That's why I don't want to give people an excuse to just be like, well, I got paracord.
No. Don't use bootlaces. Don't use paracord because you're going to turn a bad scenario into a nightmare scenario real quick.
Yeah.
Because
that's going to cut through your skin. Correct.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've seen crazy, and people do in the moment, they do what they need to do. And I commend them for that. It's not criticism, but when you have equipment like this that's available, have it with you.
Right.
So have that with you. So yeah, we've worked with Snake staff, to develop, kind of the pricing and stuff to,
but to your point, it's like, yes, there is a point where a tourniquet is too narrow, like a piece of paracord.
Correct.
But we're far from that with this.
With that, yeah.
This is what, an inch wide or so.
Yeah.
Fuzz over an inch.
Yeah. So like I said, with my daughter, it's like, so you have a little kid with a skinny arm, this thing works.
Yeah.
Now, also service animals.
Yep.
So you have your service animal out with you on a hike, or you're out
your
jogging.
hunting dog, just your lab.
Service animal, hunting dogs, whatever. This is useful on them as well.
Yeah.
So it's
I never even thought of that.
Great utility kind of all around. And I just see it as a great piece of equipment. So, these are, going back to like what's essential in a kit, this being number one. If you have a kit, tourniquet should most certainly come with it.
Yeah.
Right. Clotting gauze, or, we're working, with a company. I won't get into that because we haven't even met yet.
Yeah.
We've just been kind of email exchange, but we have a meeting when I get home next week. But really having some sort of, clotting material, clotting gauze is essential too, because that's another thing that's going to take a bad scenario and kind of, calm it down quite a bit, because you have a better chance of getting that under control. You and I talked about this last night, Z-gauze, compressed Z-gauze.
Yeah.
Like, I love this stuff.
Yeah.
It comes in a little brick form. That's in our kit.
It's like a 2x2 square brick, 3/8 of an inch thick, but it's like endless.
Yeah.
It just, you start, once you pop that seal, you start pulling it out. It just,
it's like you pull that thing out and all of a sudden you have a, basketball size, wad of gauze there.
Yeah.
And again, there's so many utilities in that, packing wounds. I mean, if you need to use it to, tie sticks on as a splint, or, what have you, if you don't have splint material, bulky dressings around foreign bodies of the eyes, bulky dressings around any foreign body impaled. Whenever you have a foreign body, you don't want to go ripping that out because you don't know where it is.
Yeah.
And that foreign body, although, you're impaled with it, it may be laying up against that vessel and compressing the vessel that's preventing you from bleeding out.
Right.
You go pull that out and it's like, you have no chance of controlling that bleeding there.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
and splint, we put splint material in ours too. Because over the, an actual aluminum splint, right? So, and it's enough splint.
This will be in your kit?
Yeah. Enough splint to do arm, ankle, lower extremity, type stuff. So,
okay.
And I just see that, as an essential piece. Bless you. I see that as an essential piece. Again, seeing, on the back end of the bad things that can happen, that can turn into, limb threatening injuries if we would have just splinted it. And, you have a fracture dislocation of your ankle, and as you're moving somebody, out, extracting them from, a mountain somewhere, and that extremity is just flopping around.
Right.
Again, you're shredding vessels and nerves in there.
Yeah.
Right. And you're putting that limit risk that you don't need to.
What about,
and it's comfort. I mean,
outside of prescription, the typical prescription or allergy related medications that those people are going to know about, what do you, like myself, I'm not allergic to anything. I don't have any real issues, but I'm headed to Alaska on a goat hunt.
Yeah.
What medicine wise do you suggest people have in their pack?
So life-saving medication, there's kind of convenience medications, and there's truly life-saving medications. The convenience being kind of pain control. You get an upset stomach, you feel nauseated. You're not dying from that, but you also don't want to ruin your hunt by having a GI bug either, right? But there's not much to do. I mean, you can do ginger, things like that for upset stomach, and take that along with you, kind of over the counter. But using things like Zofran, Dancetron, things like that for nausea.
Okay.
For nausea and vomiting. So, that can be very useful. That comes through prescription. I want to get to the point to where, we're able to, through a 5-10 minute conversation, equip you with all the essential medications that you need in that kit to go hunting.
Right.
The true life-threatening medication I feel, you should carry on these hunts is epinephrine. And again, going back to, one is none, should
what's
be
that
carrying to allergic reactions.
Okay.
You go into anaphylaxis. Actually had to, get involved with a guy at Winter Strong this year. Corey Anderson, MMA fighter that, had a bad anaphylactic reaction. I mean, guy broke out in hives everywhere.
Really?
He ended up getting epi. So, the very basic over-the-counter you can do for allergies in that type of situation is Benadryl and Pepsid. You can go get those over the counter and carry those. So if you feel, itchy, kind of that throat itch, sneezing, stuff like that, take a Benadryl and Pepsid can help, prevent that from progressing. And the reason for Pepsid, everybody, probably think I'm crazy saying Pepsid as a reflux, heartburn medicine, but Pepcid is an H2 blocker, right? Benadryl being an H1 blocker. When we combine those two together, it controls the histamine release more in our body.
Sure.
So
if you're just for general soreness, whether it's, muscle soreness, you take myself, go on this goat hunt a day or two and carrying a 70-pound pack, and your knee is crazy sore and whatnot. Are you Tylenol or an ibuprofen guy?
It depends on your medical history.
Okay.
If you have any sort of, if you're a heavy drinker, fatty liver, any problems with your liver to begin with, not Tylenol. Okay. Tylenol is processed through the liver. And then on the flip side with Advil, ibuprofen, that can be pretty hard on your kidneys.
Okay.
Right. So, and in those situations where, you get guys that go in and start doing miles upon miles and they've not prepared for that. They've not trained for that. They've not, tried to acclimate towards that workload. You can get into a situation called, rhabdo, rhabdomyolysis, where your muscles actually start breaking down. And as the muscles break down, you start processing more protein through your kidneys and you can shut your kidneys down. Okay. So in that situation, ibuprofen is a bad thing, right? You're just gonna escalate that, that kidney failure, right?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So, that's why the key to prevent that and to address it is when you're out there, water, tons of water. Don't get yourself to a point where, it's like, okay, you had about a cup of water in a day and you're out hiking and humping, you're going to put yourself in the rhabdo.
Okay.
Right. You're going to get that muscle breakdown. So, water being essential in, you can,
do you believe in the electrolytes and the stuff that you put into your water bottles and all that?
I do in a sense. I'm more of a guy, I believe in just trying to keep it as natural as possible. Right. So, I think the best sports drink that you can create very cheaply is just pink Himalayan salt, a little bit of lemon and water. Pink Himalayan is going to give you the essential vitamins, minerals that you need in those situations. So, but I think a lot of those products are great. And I think that, as far as the potassium and, it's helping you. Gatorade's garbage. I mean, Yeah. It's just sugar and the dyes and all that other stuff that I think that's worthless. But I think in those situations where you're really sweating and you're out there really, hiking, repleting with an electrolyte mix is a good idea.
If anything, if it makes it taste a tiny bit better and it makes you want to drink more, that's actually good.
That's a good thing. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And hydration is not coffee. It's not tea. Right?
What are you saying?
It's not soda.
Talking to my wife?
No, but it's amazing. It's how much did you drink? And I had 6 cups of coffee. That's not hydration.
That's me
and you can grade how hydrated you are. Just look at your urine.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're peeing,
I can see mine in the dark.
Right. So if you're
it's neon.
But if you're peeing and your urine's looking like tea,
yeah.
You've got a bad, that's a really bad scenario, right? You're shutting down, man. No, but if your urine's looking like tea, and if you're starting to notice blood, and urine's tough because sometimes as you pee blood, it can look like that dark tea.
Oh,
right. Because again, take a drop of blood.
Yeah, it's mixing.
It's mixing with the urine, right? With that volume. And sometimes it can look like, really, really bright red, pink, and that's just because there's a small amount of blood, right? Yeah. You have kidney injury, you have bladder injury, you may have a kidney stone. Most people are going to know that because that's horrifically painful.
Yeah.
But, when you're out doing these hunts, make a point of checking your urine. If your urine's getting dark, you need to up your hydration. Don't put yourself into a scenario where you start getting, muscle breakdown,
right?
Stressing your other organs because you're not drinking enough water, right? Yeah. So, if your urine's to the point, clear, straw colored, you're doing a good job.
Yeah.
Right. You don't need fancy test strips. You don't need to go to a, ER to find out if you're hydrated enough. Just look at your urine.
Yeah. Sure. Well, man, this is all, we could just go on and on, but I can't wait to, get you out here and actually get some of this stuff done in person and whatnot. But, it's funny. I was going to talk to you. I was going to actually ask you about the healthcare system. I was going to ask you about RFK.
Oh, dude,
stuff that's
going to be a full day podcast because I can go off on that stuff, man, of how, kind of the corruption, just corruption and structure and everything within healthcare now. And, I hear from so many people, our healthcare system's broken.
Yeah.
It's not broken. It's working exactly how it's designed to work.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's working to keep customers.
Right.
Healthcare is, encroaching like 20% of the GDP in this country. And when you're talking of trillions,
it's
business, man. For every $5 we spend in this country, $1 is spent on healthcare. And, as business people, like what extent will they go to maintain that customer base? Because that's the reality. Like, we're customers.
Right. Not patients.
Within the healthcare industry.
Yeah.
Like, we're customers.
Yeah.
And we can go back historically of how that happened and why that happened and why it is the way it is now. And, kind of being on that front line of it and kind of the vantage point that we have and the way we see it, man, I can go on for hours for that.
Yeah,
that's a
5 hours.
You're just going to get me. Yeah. You'll get me fired.
Part one.
Yeah. That's where you're going to get me fired up. And then Heather will be like, oh, way to go. Like, way to get him fired up.
We don't need to get you fired. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Well,
no firing. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
these are all my own opinions and not my employer. And I don't represent any employer right now.
Yeah. Well, man, thank you. PrepEm Wild on Instagram.
Yeah, PrepEm Wild. PrepEm _wild.
Spell that.
PrepEm Wild.
_
Yeah. PrepEm _wild.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. And then PrepEmWild.com.
PrepEmWild.com. That's under construction. We don't have that up. I don't want people landing on the page and, there's no inventory, no stock. Like you said, sourcing materials is challenging and trying to, this has taken us time in sourcing and to make sure it's trusted and that it's quality stuff. As much as, want to educate and prepare people, also don't want them to have like, shitty gear and go out there and, create a bad scenario. So, it's been a process, man. It's been fun. And, I still have a full-time job, trying to get this thing going, but it's just become. Yeah.
You imagine like 11 hospitals or something?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
1,000 docs or more.
Yeah.
Under your management.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's insane.
So, and this is just the stage of my career that I'm passionate about my patient care. I'm passionate about what I do every day, with my employment, but this is just a stage of my career where it's like, it's a new passion of preparing people. And I guess you just spend so many years seeing tragedy. And honestly, it's just, it's a mental health avenue to help me in dealing with 20 years of seeing tragic events and actually feeling like preventing that. It gives me an outlet, and honestly, that's the point of that. It just provides me with an outlet to focus on something more positive than the nightmares and things that I've seen for 20 years. So, well, that's the real deal.
You're a special human. We sure appreciate you.
Wow. So appreciate you equally.
Yeah. So. You've been amazing. My kids will text you and message you and, and
I don't mind that at all.
Having that trusted knowledge there's been awesome. So,
and I never mind that. I enjoy that. And again, going back to that, that provides me an outlet of feeling as though it's like I'm helping and doing good. And I guess it's a major, if there's any psychiatrists watching, they pinpoint what's going on, but it's just kind of it's just a tool to use to kind of avoid the bad stuff. So,
Well, thank you, bud.
All right. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks.